This happened last year in October, so pretty much 3 months ago or so. Technically last year though. Anywho, my girlfriend and I decided to make a Walmart run. She was having nuclear-like cramps and demanded I take her to get some ibuprofen. And you never say no to a woman who's on her period. It was already late and we got back at around 2 a.m. We live on campus as we're both college sophomores. I park in a parking garage that's about a 5-minute walk away from our dorm, so it's not very far at all. I parked on the 3rd floor, but the exit was on the 6th. We decided to take the elevator instead of the stairs. It was a Thursday morning now, so everybody was in bed pretty much, or out drinking. Thirsty Thursday can get you like that. The campus was unusually silent because of this. As the elevator doors opened, there was a man standing inside. I was a bit taken aback at first. This man was a hulking giant. I'm talking 6'5", 280 pounds, and extremely muscular. He had that stereotypical resting look of "I'm going to fucking murder you." I didn't move myself, but my girlfriend could have taken on an entire army of Nazi troops with the way she was feeling. She got in right beside him, and I followed behind. We rode up to the 6th floor, and the guy began to make some pleasant small talk. He asked about our majors, where we lived, how we liked the school, and if the curriculum was good. He was a pretty decent fellow, all things considered. All the while, I'd forgotten to press the button of where we were supposed to get off. Instead, we just rode the elevator up to the 9th floor with him, which was the parking garage office sector. There were nothing but offices up there. My girlfriend and I awkwardly laughed about this. When we got to the 9th floor, though, we expected the man to step off and head out. Instead, he just stood there. He waited until the doors closed and said he'd follow us down to make sure we got out okay. Suddenly, I was very creeped out. I could tell my girlfriend was now too. She tucked herself behind me. I'm only 6'1" and 170 pounds with all the arm strength of SpongeBob SquarePants. Instead of hitting the 6 button, he randomly hit 3. In my state of shock, I just blankly stared at him. My girlfriend realized what he'd done and immediately tried to hit the 6 button, but we'd already passed by that floor. She reached out again, but this time the man grabbed her hand. His face immediately changed. The man was no longer pleasantly smiling or grinning courteously like before. The look of malice on his face will haunt me until this very day. I intervened and pulled my girlfriend's hand back. The elevator arrived on the 3rd floor, and my girlfriend and I bolted out of there. Luckily, that was the same floor we had parked on. The man in the elevator even tried to give chase for a few feet, but once we'd reached my car, he sprinted off around a corner. We drove to the campus security station, which was about a 1-minute drive from the garage, and told them what had happened. It wasn't even an hour later that they had caught the guy and arrested him. He was out on probation, but also had drugs in his system and was just pretty fucked up in general. Of course, that didn't stop my girlfriend and I from making late-night trips after that, though. It did freak us out for a while, and we stuck with taking the stairs henceforth and forevermore. I was in Taiwan one year when I was younger and had traveled to a busy night market. These are popular gatherings that usually operate in the evenings. Nearby, I spotted a sign for a net cafe in a 5 to 6 story tall building. Thinking I'd fire off some quick emails, I walked into the dark, small entrance of this building. It seemed this building was a lot older than the others around and hadn't been well maintained. I suppose that wasn't too out of the ordinary in Taiwan, though. The entrance was just a dark hallway that led to a small elevator. I pressed the elevator call button and entered. This elevator was uncharacteristically new compared to the rest of the building, but I didn't take too much mind of it. Like some Chinese buildings, there was not a 4th floor on the button list. It's considered bad luck since 4 sounds like death. This meant the only buttons available were 1, 2, 3, 5, and 6, which were all the usual fare. I looked for the floor the net cafe was at, 6th, the very top floor. I pressed that button. It lurched into action quietly and began to ascend upward. When the elevator stopped, I figured it was on my floor, so I instinctively began to step out. Right before taking another step though, the sight outside the elevator stopped me in my tracks. It was pitch black, only lit up by the light in the elevator. It looked like this space hadn't been occupied for decades. There were random pieces of furniture strewn about, covered with white cloth and similar things. It was a fairly small building, so each floor was single occupancy. I could see pretty much the entire floor from in the elevator. I was thinking I must have got off on the wrong place, so I checked the light that's supposed to indicate which floor you're on. Strangely, there was nothing there. None of the indicators were lit up. The floor button to the Net Cafe was still lit as well, so I knew I hadn't reached that floor yet. All of this happened within just a couple of seconds. That's when I noticed a figure moving in the distance of that floor. It was not very visible, but I could make out what looked like a person dressed in some kind of gown, slowly moving toward the elevator. I was thoroughly creeped out. I started pressing the door closed button as fast as I could. As soon as I pressed it though, the elevator light flickered off. I was this close to pissing my pants. It's actually kind of freaking me out just even thinking back on it. The lights flickered back on in under a second, and the door closed. The elevator jolted back to life, and a few moments later it opened like it was supposed to the Net Cafe. I was beyond relieved at this point. I walked out immediately and sat down at a computer. After gathering up my wits a bit, I walked over to the cashier's desk and told them what I'd seen. The girl working there listened to me, and her face turned a bit ashen. I asked her if she'd heard of a similar experience. She told me she had never experienced it herself, but some coworkers and occasional customers had brought it up before. Basically, the building has 6 floors, and that 4th floor had a history. Apparently, that floor used to be a hair salon of some sort, until one of the employees killed herself there for some reason. She slit her wrists over the hair wash station and died. The store continued operations, despite stories of weird appearances. When the customers got their hair rinsed, the water would sometimes look a little red, like the customer was bleeding from their scalp. It was just little things like that. And then a couple of people reported seeing someone's figure walking away in a mirror. Naturally, the business closed down a few months later. The building owner tried to re-rent the place out but never had much luck. Most businesses there are quite superstitious, and no one wanted to rent the 4th floor after someone had died in it, even at an extremely cheap price. Finally, after dropping the price to nearly nothing, a stationery supply store wanted to rent. During the renovations of the floor, however, several accidents happened. Tools would end up in strange places. A mirror from the previous business shattered when no one was near it. And finally, a worker had his hand jammed between the elevator doors when it closed on him unexpectedly. The workers refused to continue working, and finally, the business left. The building owner finally gave up and shut down that floor altogether. He had the elevator company come in to replace the panel, so the elevator could no longer arrive on that floor. Let me repeat that. The elevator was programmed to not go to the 4th floor anymore. It didn't even have a button for it. But for some reason, sometimes when people take that elevator, it would stop on the 4th floor. The doors would open, and some, like myself, would report seeing a figure walking around in the dark. This happened when I was about 8 years old. For reference, I'm female. I grew up in an apartment complex with about 20 buildings, each around 25 floors high. Each floor had 4 apartments, which made about 2,000 apartments in all. Each building had a car park underneath with an elevator and a flight of stairs that went from the car park to the roof. My apartment was on the 5th floor of an apartment building right in the middle of the complex. I used to take the bus home from school, and it would drop me off at the corner across from the complex. I'd have to cross the road and walk home. One day, I had gotten off the bus and crossed the road when I saw some neighborhood kids had drawn a hopscotch on the footpath just outside. I loved hopscotch, so I dropped my bag down for a moment and started to play. On my second go though, a lady who looked to be in her mid-20s came over to me and asked if she could play as well. I was a naturally shy little girl, but I was also very polite, especially to adults. I gave her my stone and let her have a go at it. Once she'd had her turn, she asked if her friends could come play as well. 3 guys, all in their mid to late 20s, rushed over. This really freaked me out. As I said, I was very shy, especially of males. I was aware now that I was alone with them, and I felt very uncomfortable suddenly. I told the lady that they could continue to play without me, but now I had to go home. She gave me this sad puppy look and said she hoped we could be great friends. I really didn't want to hurt her feelings, but I was pretty scared at this point. I lied and told her I would take my school bag home and come right back. I picked up my bag and hightailed it out of there. When I got home, I thought that would be the end of it. I'd never see them again. I was scared of getting in trouble from my parents for talking to strangers, so I didn't tell them about what happened. The next day, that lady was waiting for me though, at the gates to the complex. She told me she was very sad I had lied and not come back, and I'd really hurt her feelings. I said I was sorry, but my mom had made me do my homework. She asked instead if we could play now then. I looked around and saw her friends waiting by a van. She told me they wanted to take me to have ice cream at Kiki's. Kiki's was this new place that had just opened nearby. Each ice cream came with a toy, and all my friends at school had at least 2 each. My family couldn't afford to go there ourselves, so I'd always kind of felt left out, and now this lady was offering to take me. I knew I shouldn't go with her though, so I told her thank you, but I couldn't go today. At that point, she got really angry. She said I had to go with her. Being a timid kid, I hated being yelled at, so this freaked me out and I started to cry. The lady said she was sorry and gave me a hug. Then she tried to lead me to the van, saying an ice cream would make it all better. At this point, I pulled away and started to run home. This time, they followed me. I could hear them all running after me, and I knew they were faster than me. I figured I'd have to hide from them. I flew into the underground car park of the building closest to the gate and hid between 2 cars. I heard them run down the ramp and stop. Then I heard the lady calling out to me. "Oh, you like hide and seek then, huh? Let's play. Ready? We're coming to get you." I was shivering violently. I knew they would find me there. I decided I'd get to the elevator shaft, take the elevator to the top, then run down the stairs a few floors and take it back down. Maybe they'd see the elevator stop on the top floor and assume I was hiding there, so they'd waste time searching there while I got away. The elevator was on the other side of the car park. I had to go around 2 corners to get there. I crept along the wall, staying as low as I could until I was around the corner. Then I bolted for the elevator. The elevator was in a small room that had this gigantic door. I got inside, but the door wouldn't close all the way. I pressed the up button and watched as the elevator slowly descended, stopping at nearly every floor. I crept over to that big door and peeked out through the crack to see where they were. I spotted them just as I heard the elevator bing from behind me, and without thinking, I used all my strength to close the door. As I said before, that door was huge, so it made a big noise as it closed. Even as I ran into the elevator, I knew they'd know where I was now. The elevator was full of people though. I squeezed right to the back, hiding between 2 boys and a girl I'd seen around before. The girl lived in my building but on a different floor. I watched the elevator doors closing, praying they would hurry up. Just before they did so, a hand shot between them and they opened again. The woman was standing there, looking furious. "Get out here!" she yelled. An elderly woman asked what the matter was, and the woman said I was her daughter and I'd run away. I was too scared to speak up as the woman grabbed my arm and started trying to drag me out. Luckily, one of those boys sensed something was wrong and stopped her though. He asked if I knew her, and I shook my head and started to cry. The girl from my building picked me up, while the boy demanded the woman leave me alone. since the elevator was full of people who now realized what was happening. The woman and the guy sprinted away. The girl from my building and two of the guys in the elevator walked me home and told my parents what had happened. The police were called, and after some investigating, it was found out that the woman and the men were child traffickers. I'm so grateful that boy realized something was off and stepped in. Who knows where I'd be if he hadn't that day. A few years back, my husband and I were living in an apartment in Brooklyn. One night, we decided to check our neighborhood's sex offender registry and discovered an offender lived in our building. It wasn't really a big deal to us, as we didn't have any children at the time, but I should mention that this guy was one creepy-looking dude. I'm talking about those wild hair, crazy eyes kind of creeper. You know, the real scary kind. We would often see the guy walking around the building or the neighborhood every now and then. He even set up a fruit stand for a while and would wildly yell at people as they passed by. He never really bothered us though, so we mostly didn't give him a second thought. At the time, I was working a pretty crazy job where I would be at work really late every night and have to take a taxi home at the end. On those nights, my husband would stay up late and wait for me to arrive home. I was a bit brain dead when I would get home after a 20-hour shift, so sometimes it would take me a while to find my keys, and my husband would have to let me in. One night, I had texted I was leaving the office around 3 a.m. About half an hour later, my husband could hear our door handle jiggling. Assuming it was me, he got up to go let me in. Something, however, made him look out the peephole first. There he saw him, the sex offender, completely naked, standing on the other side of the door. As soon as he sensed my husband looking out, the man stopped jiggling the handle. He looked up and put his eyeball right up to the peephole, trying to gaze in, as if he could tell my husband was looking at him right now. For some reason I don't really understand, my husband opened the door. As soon as he did this, the guy tried to force himself into the apartment. Eventually, he beat the man back and got the door closed. Then he called me. I was about a mile away from our building when I got that call, and I was terrified. It must have been quite obvious, because as we arrived to the building, the taxi driver asked if he should walk me to the front door. I told him yes, I would very much appreciate that. He stood with me until my husband came outside to walk me in. We lived on the 6th floor, and from the moment we went in, you could hear someone running up and down the staircase. We ran to the elevator and jumped in, pressing the door close button over and over until it started to move. When we got to about the 3rd floor, the floor where the sex offender was at the time, he began to bang on the elevator doors trying to get in. We heard him run to the staircase and start running up the stairs to catch us. When we got to our apartment, I called the cops to report this terrifying situation. It took them 2 hours just to arrive, and by that time the guy had already picked up his clothes and gone home. The cops didn't even come inside the building. They made us go outside and didn't even get out of their car. When I explained what happened, they simply responded by saying, "You live in Brooklyn, get used to it." Eventually, we moved out of that building, but whenever we go back to that neighborhood, we still see that guy at his fruit stand, yelling at people as they walk by. This might not be your typical scary story, but it disturbs me to this day, so I'll share it with you. I was about 14 years old when this happened. I was in my bed trying to fall asleep, but as always, I was failing at that. My dad was in the living room trying to rock my brother to sleep as well. It was a normal routine, but this night was anything but normal. I finally thought I was about to fall asleep when I began to hear these loud, frantic knocks on my front door. It echoed through the entire house. It was about 3 a.m. at this point. The knocks were immediately followed by a girl screaming, "Help, please, my mom needs help!" over and over. She was practically shrieking. My dad assumed it was some sort of trap. They use a little girl, dad becomes vulnerable, opens the door, easy access inside the house, and so forth. He was yelling back at her to leave us alone through the door. I could hear the girl crying, kicking our door over and over again. Her screams still ring in my head every now and then. By this point, I was sitting upright in my bed, crying as well. I was terrified and upset with my dad. What if this girl really needed help? Maybe 10 minutes go by of this continuous crying and screaming when I hear a man outside my window. It was only a few inches beside the front door where the girl was. I could hear the man telling the girl to shut up. I heard him grab her. She was screaming for him to let her go. I felt sick to my stomach. I wanted to look out my window, but I was paralyzed with fear. I could hear him dragging her into the street. Her screams for her mother became quieter the further they got. Soon after, I heard about 3 cars speed off down the street after a lot of people were yelling, I assume at each other. My parents called the police and tried to get me to fall asleep, but I was too scared and traumatized. To this day, which is about 3 years later, I still think about that little girl and her mother all the time. I think about what might have happened to them. I used to want to know, but now I don't think I want to, as bad as that might sound. I don't really know if we could have done anything to help.